My son abandoned me when I was sick, believing his career was more important than my life. But what he didn't know was that a quiet, reclusive billionaire was watching. When the man who had everything did what my own son wouldn't, it was a turning point that changed everything for us both. The world had a way of hitting you when you were already on the ground, didn't it? Just a few weeks ago, I was Mary, a spry 62-year-old widow with a thriving garden and a schedule packed with volunteering. Now, I was just a diagnosis, a rare, aggressive form of cancer. The words stage 4 and inoperable hung in the air like a death sentence. The doctors gave me a timeline, a number of months that felt less like a prediction and more like an expiration date. The first person I called was my son, David, my only child. He lived a few states over, building a life I was so proud of. He had a great job, a beautiful wife, and 2 kids who called me Mimi. I had envisioned them being my support system, my rock through this terrifying journey. I called him, my voice trembling as I delivered the news. The line was silent for a moment, a silence that felt heavier than any grief I had ever known. "Mom," he finally said, his voice flat. That's awful. I'm so sorry." I held the phone tight, waiting for him to say what I needed to hear. "I'll be right there. I'll come help you. You're not alone." But he didn't. Instead, he started talking about his work, about the big promotion he was up for, about how his wife had a new project. He was building walls, not bridges. He was creating distance, not closing it. It was then that a cold, awful truth dawned on me. My son saw my illness not as a crisis for his family, but as a complication for his life. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments, phone calls, and agonizing questions. I was alone. My husband had passed away 5 years prior, and David was all I had. I needed help with chores, rides to the hospital, just a hand to hold. I called David multiple times, but his responses grew shorter, colder. "Mom, I'm really busy," or "Can we talk later?" The excuses piled up like a wall between us. It wasn't just a lack of support. It was a deliberate abandonment. He wasn't just saying no. He was disappearing. I felt a stinging combination of betrayal and sorrow. How could the boy I raised, the man I had sacrificed for, turn his back on me when I needed him most? The woman who made sure he never went without, who worked 2 jobs to put him through college, who was his biggest cheerleader, was just a burden now. I was sitting on my porch, staring at my unkempt garden, feeling the weight of my diagnosis and my son's neglect, when a man walked across the lawn from the mansion next door. His name was Mr. Black, though I only knew him by his last name. He was a reclusive billionaire who had lived there for years, a ghost in his own house. I had seen his expensive cars and the security guards, but I had never spoken to him. He was a mystery, a man who had everything and seemed to want nothing to do with anyone. He was tall, with a shock of silver hair and a sharp suit that looked like it cost more than my house. He stopped in front of me, and I braced myself for a complaint about my overgrown lawn or my general lack of tidiness. Instead, he simply said, "Mrs. Peterson, I hear you're not well." I was shocked. How did he know? "I'm fine, thank you. Just a little under the weather." I didn't want to talk about it. I certainly didn't want to talk about it with a stranger. He chuckled, a deep rumbling sound. "Don't insult my intelligence, Mary." And the use of my first name was an even bigger shock. My gardener told my chef, who told my head of security, who told me, "You have cancer." He looked at me, his eyes surprisingly kind. "You're a good woman. You volunteer at the library, you help at the church, you're always baking cookies for the neighborhood kids. I've been watching you for years. So, what's the plan?" I was stunned. He knew all this about me? I had been living next to him for years, and I thought he didn't even know my name. I don't have a plan, I admitted, a tear finally escaping and rolling down my cheek. My son, he's too busy. The words came out with a bitterness I hadn't even realized I was feeling. Mr. Black didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there, looking at me with an expression of, not pity, but something far more powerful, understanding. Then he did something that my own son wouldn't do. He walked over, sat down on the step beside me, and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it was the most comforting thing that had happened to me in weeks. "Mary," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you're not alone. What your son wouldn't do, I will. We're going to get you a plan, a team, the best doctors. We're going to fight this together." It was the exact thing my heart had been aching to hear, not from a stranger, but from my own flesh and blood. And it was a complete stranger who said it. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow, but his kindness was a balm. I looked at this man, this billionaire who had lived next door like a phantom, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. He was a neighbor, a stranger, a ghost who had stepped out of the shadows and into my life just when I thought I had no one left. The fight had just begun, and it was clear that my opponent wasn't just the disease. It was also the crushing weight of my son's abandonment. But now it seemed I had an ally, a very unexpected, very powerful ally. This was just the beginning of what unfolded. You won't want to miss how my son's choice led to an unlikely alliance that would change everything. My son's rejection was a wound more painful than any physical symptom I was experiencing. It gnawed at me, a constant hum of sorrow and disbelief. I had spent my entire life as a mother, and in one phone call, that identity felt stripped away. He had always been my priority. When he wanted to go to summer camp, I took on an extra cleaning job. When he needed a new car for college, I sold my mother's heirloom jewelry. Every choice I made was with his future in mind. And now, my future was an uncertain, terrifying road, and he was nowhere to be found. The silence from him was deafening, a constant reminder of my abandonment. I'd sit by the phone, willing it to ring, to show his name. Each time it buzzed with a text message, my heart would leap, only to fall back down when I saw it was just a notification from a store or a spam call. He was so close, yet so far away. Mr. Black, on the other hand, was a force of nature. True to his word, he showed up the next day, not in a suit, but in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, a look that somehow made him even more imposing. He had a clipboard in his hand, and his face was all business. "Okay, Mary," he said, not even bothering with a greeting. "I made some calls. I have appointments set up for you, the best oncologist in the state. I also have a home health aide starting tomorrow morning. She'll help you with anything you need. And I've arranged for a service to take care of your garden and the house. A clean house helps a clear mind." I was speechless. He was doing all this for me? A woman he didn't even know. I tried to thank him, but he just waved a hand impatiently. "Don't thank me. Just do what you're told. We're on a timeline." He wasn't a saint. I realized that very quickly. He was abrasive, demanding, and had the bedside manner of a drill sergeant. He was used to giving orders and having them followed. But underneath that gruff exterior, I saw something else. He wasn't doing this for praise or pity. He was doing this because he saw a problem and wanted to solve it. It was a peculiar kind of kindness, one born of efficiency and a strange sense of honor. He seemed to have a silent respect for me, for my quiet dignity, for the fact that I wasn't falling apart in a puddle of tears. He saw me as a person, a project, and a fighter. He didn't see me as a victim, and that made all the difference. My first few appointments were a whirlwind. I was shuttled from one office to another in a black town car, a silent driver at the wheel. The doctors were the best of the best, with framed diplomas and an air of quiet authority. They spoke in terms I barely understood, about treatments and prognoses and clinical trials, But Mr. Black was always there. He sat in the corner of every room, his phone in his hand, a silent but intimidating presence. He asked the hard questions, the ones I was too afraid to ask. He took notes. He made them explain things in simple terms. He was my advocate, my guardian, and my shadow. I felt a little silly, a little like a celebrity, being escorted around by a billionaire and his entourage. But I was also so incredibly grateful. He was giving me a fighting chance. My own son, on the other hand, was still a phantom. I sent him a few texts, trying to keep him in the loop. Just had my first chemo appointment. Feeling a little rough, but okay. The responses were always short, a few words, a single emoji. Okay, Mom. Feel better. It was like I was texting a ghost. The contrast between my son's neglect and Mr. Black's devotion was a constant, sharp pain in my heart. One evening, I was sitting alone, watching a movie. My home health aide, a lovely woman named Susan, was in the kitchen, making me a cup of tea. Mr. Black had provided her, of course. He'd thought of everything. My phone rang. I saw David's name, and my heart soared. I answered, my voice full of an almost desperate hope. David, hi, honey. How are you? He didn't even say hello. Mom, I'm calling because I need you to stop texting me about your health. I'm really busy, and it's starting to be a distraction. I know you're sick, but I'm trying to focus on my career here. It's not fair to me to have to worry about this right now. The words hit me like a physical blow. The hope I had been nurturing for weeks, the fragile thread of my connection to him, snapped in two. Not fair to you? I repeated, my voice hollow. I have cancer, David. I'm fighting for my life, and you're worried about your career? He sighed, a long, exasperated sound. Look, Mom, I'm just being honest. You're an adult. You need to figure this out on your own. I can't be your caretaker. I have a family to support. It was a cold, calculated answer, one that he had clearly rehearsed. The conversation was over. He had officially abandoned me. He had made a choice, and it wasn't me. It was his job, his wife, his life. He saw my illness as an obstacle to his own happiness, a thing to be avoided, a problem to be ignored. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking. The tea Susan brought me was still hot, but I didn't drink it. I felt cold to my core. The silence in the house was no longer just the quiet of being alone. It was the silence of a void, a space where my son's love should have been. My tears came then, hot and angry. I wasn't just crying for my illness. I was crying for the loss of my son. He hadn't died, but our relationship had. It was a different kind of grief, a living grief, one that followed me everywhere. The next day, Mr. Black came to visit, and he could see something was wrong. What's wrong, Mary? He asked, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I told him what David had said. He listened, his face impassive. When I was done, he just shook his head. Some people, he said, his voice quiet, aren't worth the effort. Let him go. It was the most brutal, but also the most freeing advice I had ever received. It was a new beginning. I wasn't going to wait for my son's love anymore. I was going to fight for my life, with or without him. I had an unlikely ally, a man who saw me more than a burden, and I was going to prove to both of them, my son and my neighbor, that I was a fighter. The conflict with my son was just the beginning. The real battle was with my own emotions and the shocking developments that followed. The days began to blur into a monotonous, painful routine. Doctor's appointments, chemotherapy sessions that left me weak and nauseous, and the endless, aching silence from my son. Each time the phone buzzed, a part of me would still hope, even as my mind knew better. It was always a notification or a text from a friend, never from David. The contrast was stark. Mr. Black, the man who was a stranger to me just a few weeks ago, was a constant, solid presence. He had a way of being there without being intrusive. He'd sit in the waiting rooms, a silent sentinel, his phone in hand, making calls or reading some complicated financial document, yet always ready to look up and meet my eyes with a reassuring nod. He brought me books he thought I'd like, classic novels I hadn't read since college. He even started bringing me small, thoughtful gifts: a soft cashmere blanket for the cold chemo rooms, a rare tea from an obscure region of China, a pair of comfortable slippers for my swollen feet. These weren't grand, public gestures. They were quiet, personal acts of care from a man who had no reason to care. One afternoon, I was at home, feeling particularly low after a difficult treatment. Susan, my home health aide, was in the kitchen, and I was sitting in the living room trying to read. My phone buzzed. It was a text from David. My heart gave a little jolt, a Pavlovian response to his name. "Hey, Mom," the text read. "I know things are rough, but I got a promotion. We're celebrating at the house tonight. It would mean a lot if you could make it." My stomach twisted. A promotion. After everything. He wasn't reaching out to check on me, but to ask me to be a part of his celebration, to be a prop in his happy life. I felt a surge of rage so intense it made me dizzy. The audacity! He had abandoned me when I was sick, when I needed him most. But now that his life was going well, he wanted me to show up and smile. I put the phone down, not even bothering to reply. I had nothing to say to him, nothing that would express the depth of my hurt, the chasm he had created between us. Minutes later, the doorbell rang. It was Mr. Black. He stood there, a small potted orchid in his hand. "Susan said you might need a little cheering up," he said, his voice unusually soft. He stepped inside and saw my phone on the table. He picked it up and read the text from David. His face, which was usually a mask of stoicism, tightened. "He really has no shame, does he?" he said, his voice a low rumble. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He looked at me, at the tears welling in my eyes. "Don't go, Mary," he said, his eyes hard. "He doesn't deserve you." I nodded slowly. "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But he's my son. How do I just let go?" Mr. Black sat down next to me on the sofa. "You don't let go of the love," he said, and I was shocked at the wisdom in his words. "You just let go of the hope that he'll be the son you always wanted him to be." It was a profound and heartbreaking truth. I had to stop hoping for the son who would rush to my side, who would hold my hand, who would tell me everything would be okay. That son didn't exist anymore. A few days later, a new doctor joined my team. His name was Dr. Cohen, and he was an expert in a new type of gene therapy. Mr. Black had flown him in from another state, a detail I only learned later. Dr. Cohen was kind, patient, and brilliant. He explained the treatment in a way that gave me real, tangible hope, not just platitudes. He talked about my case with a quiet urgency, like it was a puzzle he was determined to solve. Mr. Black sat through every consultation, listening intently, asking questions, even when the doctor's answers were complex and technical. He had a genius for absorbing information and getting to the heart of the matter. He was a partner in this fight, a strange, unlikely ally, but one I trusted more than my own son. My physical health was fluctuating, but my emotional state was on a steady upward climb. With every kind gesture from Mr. Black and with every new bit of hope from my medical team, the wound of my son's abandonment began to heal. It was still there, a scar that would never fully fade, but it no longer felt like a fresh, gaping wound. I started to see my life not as a countdown, but as a new chapter, one filled with unexpected friendships and the quiet dignity of fighting for myself. Mr. Black wasn't just helping me with my health. He was helping me find myself again. He was showing me that I was a person, not just a mother. What happened next, however, was something I never could have prepared for. The conflict with my son was about to take a turn I never expected, involving my late husband's will and a shocking discovery.
And just as I was beginning to find peace, I would be forced to confront my son's true motives. The real battle was just beginning, and I was a new woman ready to fight. The situation was about to become far more complicated than I could have ever imagined. I was about to learn the real reason for my son's betrayal, and it would change everything. You won't want to miss what happens next.
My son's absence was a shadow over my life, but Mr. Black's presence was a surprising light. He was a puzzle of a man. One minute, he was all business and brusque orders. The next, he was making quiet, insightful comments about the art on my walls or the books on my shelf. He seemed to have a deep respect for a life well lived, even a quiet one like mine. My medical appointments became less terrifying and more like a series of small, manageable tasks. I had a team, a plan, and a powerful ally. I even started to joke with the nurses, and I could feel my spirit, so battered by the last few weeks, slowly mending. Then came the day I received a call from a lawyer I didn't know. He introduced himself as a representative of my late husband's estate. "I'm calling about a matter regarding the trust," he said, his voice clipped and professional. My heart sank. My husband, Robert, had been a smart, careful man. He had set up a trust for me before he died, with me as the sole beneficiary. It was our retirement, our safety net. "Is there a problem?" I asked, my voice tight. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It seems a significant portion of the assets have been liquidated. A very large sum was withdrawn, and we believe it was a fraudulent transaction." My hands started to shake. The safety net was gone. I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me, a fear far more potent than any I had felt about my illness. I immediately called Mr. Black. He was at my house within 10 minutes. I handed him the phone, and he listened to the lawyer, his face a mask of cold fury. He asked a few sharp, pointed questions, and I could tell by the lawyer's responses that he was impressed. When Mr. Black hung up, he looked at me, his eyes dark with rage. "This isn't fraud, Mary," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The withdrawal was authorized. It was signed with your legal signature, but we both know you didn't do it." He paused, and then the truth hit me with the force of a train. "Your son, David, had a power of attorney for your financial affairs. He activated it and took the money." The world tilted. My son, the boy I raised, the man I loved, he hadn't just abandoned me, he had robbed me. He had emptied my safety savings, the money my husband and I had worked our entire lives for, the same money that was supposed to fund my treatment, my life. I couldn't speak. I felt a visceral, stomach-churning betrayal. It wasn't just money. It was a violation of the most sacred trust between a mother and a son. The reason for his sudden coldness, his emotional distance, became horribly clear. He wasn't just busy, he was guilty. He couldn't face me because he was a thief. He had to abandon me to hide what he had done. The pain of his emotional abandonment was nothing compared to this. It was a complete, final destruction of everything I thought I knew about him. Mr. Black, seeing my distress, moved quickly. He took my hand, a rare gesture of comfort. "Mary, we're going to get this back, every last cent." He made a few calls, speaking in a foreign language that sounded like a mix of French and Italian, his voice sharp and commanding. He was a different person entirely from the one who brought me tea and books. This was the man who had built an empire. This was the man who was used to getting what he wanted. He hung up and looked at me, his face grim. "He's not just a thief," he said. "He's a fool. He left a paper trail, a very big one. He bought a luxury yacht. He put a down payment on a new house. He thought he was being clever, but he was just being sloppy. He even found out that my daughter-in-law had encouraged him, promising they would live a life of luxury as soon as he got the money. This was an ambush, a calculated act. He had used my love, my trust, and my illness against me. Suddenly, a new fire ignited within me. It wasn't just sorrow anymore. It was a white-hot fury. My son hadn't just betrayed me. He had tried to take my last chance at life. He had left me to die. Also, he and his wife could live lavishly.
I was a fighter, but this was a different kind of fight. This wasn't just about my health, it was about my dignity, my honor, and my right to live. My story, I knew, was just beginning. The battle with my son wasn't over. It was about to reach its terrifying climax. The situation had just been flipped on its head, and I was about to face my son not as a mother, but as a victim of his greed. Don't miss what happens next. You won't believe the lengths he went to hide his crime. The real fight was about to begin.
The revelation that my son had not only abandoned me, but had also stolen my life savings was a blow that shook me to my core. It was a pain so profound it eclipsed the fear of my illness. I had raised David to be a man of integrity, a man of honor. I had taught him the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the sanctity of trust. To discover that he had so callously and deliberately betrayed me felt like a betrayal of every principle I held dear. The money wasn't just money. It was the physical representation of my husband's and my shared life, our sacrifices, our dreams for a peaceful retirement. My son had not just stolen assets, he had stolen our legacy. I was sitting in my living room, the phone in my hand, staring at a picture of David as a boy, all freckles and a gap-toothed smile, when Mr. Black walked in. He didn't knock. He had become a constant presence, a silent guardian who seemed to know when I needed him most. "I've started the process," he said, his voice clipped and businesslike. "The fraud is being investigated, and the banks have been notified. We've got a good paper trail. He's not going to get away with this." His words were meant to be comforting, but they were a stark reminder of the cold reality. I looked at him, and for the first time, I couldn't hold back the tears. They came in a hot, angry torrent. How could he, Mr. Black? How could my own son do this? My voice was thick with emotion, raw and full of a grief far deeper than any I had felt over my diagnosis. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He simply sat down on the sofa next to me, his presence a solid, unmoving rock in the storm. "I've seen it before, Mary," he said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "People do desperate things for money, and once they get a taste for it, the hunger never stops. He didn't just abandon you, he sold you out." His words, though harsh, were a bitter truth I needed to hear. He wasn't sugarcoating anything. He was treating me like a partner in a business deal, not a frail old woman to be pitied. And in that moment, I realized that this was exactly what I needed. I needed the truth, no matter how ugly. I needed a plan. I needed to fight back. Mr. Black, ever the pragmatist, had already formed one. "We're going to use the media," he said, and I was shocked. A recluse like him, wanting to go public? "We'll go to the local news. We'll tell your story. They'll eat this up. The heartbroken mother, the abandoned cancer patient, the billionaire neighbor who steps in to help. It's a gold mine." His words were so clinical, so detached, that I almost laughed. But he was right. I wasn't just going to fight David in court. I was going to fight him in the court of public opinion. I was going to expose him for who he was. My anger, which had been a hot, chaotic mess, began to solidify into a cold, hard resolve. I was going to do this. I was going to show my son and the world that you don't mess with a woman who has nothing left to lose. The next few days were a blur of meetings with Mr. Black's PR team. They were young, sharp, and they treated my story like a product to be sold. They wanted details, timelines, quotes. I had to relive the phone calls, the texts, the betrayal, all for the sake of a viral news story. It was a bizarre and surreal experience, but I forced myself through it. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. This was about justice.
This was about exposing the lie that my son had been living. I was no longer a victim. I was a protagonist in my own story. And this story was going to have a very public and very painful climax for my son. The story was set to air that evening, and I sat alone, watching it with a mix of dread and anticipation. And as I watched, as I saw my face on the screen, my words being broadcast to thousands, I knew that my son would be watching too. And I knew that his life, his carefully constructed facade of success and happiness, was about to come crashing down. I was no longer Mary, the lonely, grieving mother. I was Mary, the woman who was fighting for her life and her dignity, and who had just started a war with her own son. The battle with my son was about to become a very public spectacle. I had no idea how far he would go to silence me or what he would do to try and save face. What happened next would shake my world to its core. Don't miss what's coming.
The news segment aired, and the world seemed to shift on its axis. My face, my story, was everywhere. My phone, which had been silent for weeks except for Mr. Black's calls, began to ring off the hook. Friends, distant relatives, and even people I hadn't spoken to in years were calling, offering their condolences and expressing their outrage. The comments section on the news channel's website and social media was a mix of support and vitriol. People were furious on my behalf. They couldn't believe a son would abandon his mother, let alone steal from her while she was sick. The story had gone viral, and David's name was now synonymous with betrayal and greed. The public outrage was a powerful weapon, and it was working exactly as Mr. Black had planned. I was no longer an invisible, grieving widow. I was a symbol of strength and survival. But with the public support came a new wave of attacks, more insidious than the first. The first came from my daughter-in-law, Jessica. She had always seemed like a sweet, quiet woman, but now she emerged from the shadows like a viper. Her social media was filled with posts painting me as a bitter, manipulative woman who was trying to ruin her son's life. She posted pictures of me from years ago, editing them to make me look frail and unhinged, all while claiming I was faking my illness for attention. It was a vicious campaign of character assassination, a desperate attempt to discredit me and turn the public against me. I was shocked by her cruelty, the lengths she would go to protect her stolen wealth. Then David himself spoke out. He didn't make a public statement. He did something far worse. He leaked a private text message I had sent him, one of the many pleading messages I had sent in my desperation. He twisted my words, taking them out of context to make me seem like a nagging, demanding mother who was trying to control his life. He claimed I was emotionally unstable and had pushed him away with my constant needs. He didn't deny taking the money. He just claimed it was an advance on his inheritance, something he was entitled to. He even went so far as to accuse me of fabricating the cancer diagnosis for attention. The emotional manipulation was masterful. And for a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in the comments. People were starting to wonder. Maybe there was another side to the story. Maybe I was just a crazy old lady after all. The psychological warfare was a new kind of pain, a new kind of battle I wasn't prepared for. He was trying to take not just my money, but my sanity, my credibility. But Mr. Black had a counterplan. He had already anticipated this. He called a press conference and released my full, unedited medical records. complete with a doctor's sworn statement. He didn't need to say a word. The documents spoke for themselves. They showed the truth in black and white. I was indeed a stage 4 cancer patient. He also released the full transcript of my text messages with David, showing the full context of our conversations and how his words were twisted and taken out of context. The public response was swift and brutal. The tide turned again, this time with a vengeance. David and Jessica's lies were exposed. The public outrage was even greater than before, a righteous fury against two people who would so heartlessly lie about a dying woman. They were not just greedy, they were cruel. My son's actions had escalated from simple neglect to full-blown psychological and emotional warfare. He had not just abandoned me. He had tried to destroy me. He had used my love for him as a weapon, twisting it into a twisted caricature of who I was. But I had a secret weapon too. I had Mr. Black, and I had the truth. The battle had reached its climax, and I knew that soon there would be no more hiding. My son's carefully constructed world was about to crumble down, and I would be there to watch it fall. The battle with my son was about to reach its final, terrifying climax. What he did next was so shocking it would leave the entire world speechless. The public battle had become a vicious, all-consuming spectacle. My son and daughter-in-law, now vilified in the media, were lashing out in a desperate attempt to save face. Their social media was filled with venomous posts, but thanks to Mr. Black's foresight and quick action, every one of their lies was instantly debunked. The public, initially swayed by their tearful performances, had turned on them with a fury I had never seen. I saw comments from strangers calling them monsters, demanding they be brought to justice. It was a terrifying, but also deeply satisfying feeling to see the truth win out. But their final, most desperate act was yet to come. I was at home, trying to get some rest after a particularly grueling round of chemotherapy, when I received an official-looking letter. It was a subpoena. David and Jessica were suing me. They claimed that I had manipulated Mr. Black into helping me and that I was defaming them by spreading lies about them stealing my money. They were seeking millions in damages. It was a transparent, desperate legal ploy, a last-ditch attempt to silence me and bleed me dry with legal fees. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't just trying to get away with the crime, they were trying to make me pay for having the courage to expose them. Mr. Black, upon seeing the documents, just shook his head and let out a short, cynical laugh. They're cornered, Mary. They're just throwing punches in the dark. Don't worry about it. I have the best lawyers in the country. They'll handle it. Your job is to focus on getting well. He was so calm, so reassuring, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It was one thing to fight a public battle. It was another to be dragged into a long, expensive legal war. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The fight was endless. Every time I thought I was getting a reprieve, a new front opened up. My son was relentless, and I was beginning to feel the weight of it all. The legal battle was messy and brutal. David and Jessica's lawyers were ruthless, and they used every trick in the book. They questioned my mental state, my credibility, and even my character.
They tried to portray me as a bitter, unhinged woman, lashing out at her successful son out of jealousy. They even brought up my late husband's will, trying to find a loophole that would give them more claim to his assets. It was a constant barrage of personal attacks and half-truths designed to break me down. But Mr. Black's lawyers were just as ruthless, and they were also armed with the truth. They had every document, every text message, every bank statement. There was no hiding from the facts. The most difficult part of it all was facing David in court. He sat across the room from me, a smug, arrogant look on his face, as if he was enjoying this. He looked so much like his father, a handsome, well-dressed man, but his eyes were cold and full of a cruel indifference I had never seen before. He was no longer my son. He was a stranger, a predator, and I was his prey. Seeing him so completely devoid of any guilt or remorse was the final devastating blow. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about his soul. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he had none left. The legal battle dragged on, a slow and agonizing process. Every day, I was forced to relive the betrayal, to justify my every action, my every word. But I had Mr. Black's unwavering support, and I had a newfound sense of purpose. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This was a fight for every parent who had ever been betrayed by their child, for every person who had ever been taken advantage of. This was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. My son thought he could take everything from me, but he was wrong. He couldn't take my dignity, my resolve, or the truth. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The legal battle with my son was about to reach its shattering conclusion. The truth was on my side, but the lengths he would go to were more shocking than I ever imagined.
The courtroom felt like a theater of the absurd, with David and Jessica as the lead actors in a melodrama of their own making. They were dressed in expensive clothes, their faces a carefully crafted mix of indignation and hurt. David, when on the stand, spoke with a smooth, practiced ease, twisting the narrative to portray himself as a victim of a bitter, sick old woman who was lashing out because she couldn't accept his success. "I simply took what was rightfully mine," he said, his voice dripping with faux righteousness. "My mother has been emotionally unstable for years. She has a history of exaggerating her ailments to get attention." Jessica, in her testimony, played the supportive wife, her tears perfectly timed as she spoke of her deep love for David and her concern for my mental state. She even suggested I had fabricated my cancer diagnosis for sympathy, a lie so monstrous it made my blood run cold. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, frantic beat. I wanted to leap out of my chair to scream the truth, to show everyone the cold, calculating greed in their eyes. But Mr. Black's lawyer, a formidable woman named Evelyn, just sat there, a calm, knowing smile on her face. She was a master of her craft, and I trusted her completely. When it was her turn to cross-examine Jessica, she didn't raise her voice. She simply held up a printed sheet of paper. "Jessica, is this your social media account?" she asked, her voice quiet. Jessica, caught off guard, stammered up, "Yes." Evelyn then proceeded to read a series of posts Jessica had made, posts filled with vitriol and insults, calling me a senile old witch and celebrating the money they had stolen. Jessica's face went white. She tried to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. Evelyn then showed a text message from Jessica to David with a simple, chilling message: "Get the money and we're free."
The courtroom gasped. The facade had cracked. When David took the stand again, Evelyn was even more merciless. She held up the bank statements, the yacht registration, the deed to the new house, all in his name. Mr. Peterson, you say you only took what was rightfully yours, yet you immediately used the money to buy a yacht and a new house while your mother was left to fend for herself? Why did you not use any of that money to help her with her medical bills? David stammered, his carefully constructed mask of innocence crumbling. He had no answer. Evelyn didn't wait for one. She just looked at the judge, her gaze a silent, powerful indictment. This is not about a son's inheritance. This is about a calculated act of abandonment and theft. My client, a woman fighting for her life, was betrayed by the person she trusted most. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense man, listened intently, his eyes fixed on David and Jessica. I could feel the tension in the room, the weight of a final verdict hanging in the air. This was it, the climax, the moment I had been fighting for. My life, my dignity, my entire future was in the hands of this man. I looked over at Mr. Black, who met my gaze with a reassuring nod. He had done all he could. The rest was up to fate. The judge's voice was firm and clear as he delivered his verdict. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mary Peterson. The defendant, David Peterson, is ordered to return all stolen funds plus damages and to pay for all legal fees. The gavel slammed down, a sound that echoed through the silent courtroom. David and Jessica stood there, stunned, their faces a mixture of disbelief and fury. They had lost everything: their stolen wealth, their reputation, their freedom. It was a complete and total victory. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. It was over. The battle was won. But the war was still raging inside me. The fight to regain my life and my dignity was far from over. What happens next will be the most shocking turn of events yet. You won't believe how the final twist would change everything for me and Mr. Black.
The gavel's final slam echoed in my ears long after the judge left the courtroom. Victory felt strange, hollow even. We had won. The legal case was a resounding success. The judge had ordered my son to return all of the stolen funds, pay damages, and cover all of my legal fees. David and Jessica were left standing there, stripped of their ill-gotten gains and their dignity. But as I watched them, their faces a mix of disbelief and seething rage, I felt no satisfaction. I had my money back, but the son I had loved was gone forever. The man standing across the room was a stranger, a thief who had tried to take my life from me. Mr. Black, ever the pragmatist, was already in motion. He didn't gloat or celebrate. He simply walked over to me, took my arm, and led me out of the courtroom. "It's over, Mary," he said, his voice quiet. The legal part, anyway. He had arranged for a car to be waiting, and he took me straight to his house. "You need to rest," he said. "The media will be all over you. Let them chase a ghost for a while." I didn't argue. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and still reeling from the shock of seeing my own son so completely consumed by greed. His mansion was a fortress of solitude, a stark contrast to the chaotic world we had just left. The quiet hum of the air conditioning, the muted tones of the decor, the silent presence of his staff, it was a haven. He sat me down on a plush sofa and brought me a cup of hot tea. We didn't talk. We just sat there, in a comfortable silence, until I finally spoke. "He didn't even say he was sorry," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Black looked at me, his face unreadable. "He's not sorry, Mary. He's angry. He's angry that he got caught. That's the difference between true remorse and self-pity." His words were a cold splash of reality.
and they hurt, but they were also a necessary truth. The next few days were a blur of media attention and legal filings. The story had become a national sensation, a cautionary tale about family betrayal and the power of truth. The public had turned on David and Jessica completely. Their social media was flooded with hate mail, and their lives were in ruins. David lost his promotion, and Jessica was fired from her job. They were social pariahs, and it was all their own doing. I should have felt some sense of triumph, but I didn't. I just felt an immense sadness. I had fought for my life, and I had won. But the victory felt hollow because I had lost my son in the process. I was sitting in Mr. Black's private garden one afternoon, watching the koi in his pond when he came to find me. He sat down on a bench next to me, a rare moment of stillness for him. "Your son is trying to contact you," he said, holding out his phone. "He's been sending a series of text messages." My heart skipped a beat. I took the phone, my hands trembling. The messages were a series of disjointed, desperate pleas. He wasn't apologizing for what he had done. He was apologizing for getting caught. He was begging me to make it all stop, to publicly forgive him, to help him get his life back. He even tried to blame Jessica, claiming she had manipulated him into doing it. He was a coward, trying to shift the blame to save himself. I handed the phone back to Mr. Black, a cold, hard finality settling in my heart. "I have nothing left to say to him," I said, my voice firm. "He made his choice." It was a devastating realization. The boy I had loved was gone. He had been replaced by a man I didn't know, a man who would throw his own mother under the bus to save his own skin. I had won the battle for my money, but I had lost the war for my son's soul. And in the end, that was the most painful part of all. My journey had begun with a diagnosis and ended with a verdict. But the final chapter, the one where I had to find a way to live with the ghosts of my past and build a new future, was just beginning. I had Mr. Black by my side, an unlikely ally who had become a true friend. And with his help, I was going to find a way to heal, to find peace, and to finally be at rest. The last part of my story is about to unfold. You won't believe how this billionaire neighbor who started as a complete stranger became the most important person in my life. The final shocking twist will change everything you thought you knew about our story.
The legal battle was over, but the emotional one had just begun. The victory felt hollow, a temporary balm on a wound that had been festering for decades. I had my money back, but I had lost my son forever. I was left with a painful choice: continue to mourn the son I had lost, or build a new life with the man who had unexpectedly stepped into my life when everyone else had walked away. I chose the latter. Mr. Black, the reclusive billionaire, had become my anchor in a sea of despair. He wasn't just my benefactor. He was my friend. He was the one who had seen me at my lowest and had helped me rise again. Our lives, which had been so separate, began to intertwine in the most unexpected ways. We spent our days in comfortable silence, reading, or simply watching the world go by. We talked about everything: his life, my past, the future we were building together. He told me about his wife who had passed away years ago, and how he had become a recluse after her death. He had seen my story as a chance to do something good, to fight for someone who couldn't fight for herself. I, in turn, told him about my life with my late husband, about my dreams and my disappointments, about the deep love I had for my son that had been so cruelly betrayed. As my health began to improve, so did my spirit. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. The treatment was working. I was a fighter, and with Mr. Black's support, I was winning. We started taking long walks in his garden, talking about our lives, our dreams, our shared experiences. He showed me a different kind of strength, one that was quiet and dignified, one that wasn't afraid to be kind. I, in turn, showed him a different kind of love, one that was gentle and compassionate, one that wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. One evening, we were sitting on his porch watching the sunset when he took my hand. It was a simple, tender gesture, but it held the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "Mary," he said, his voice quiet, "I want you to be a part of my life, not as a patient, not as a friend, but as a partner." My heart, which I thought had been broken beyond repair, fluttered in my chest. I looked at him, this man who had come into my life as a ghost and had become my greatest ally. He had helped me fight for my life, for my dignity, for my future. He had shown me that I was not alone, that I was worthy of love and respect. The final act of my story was not about my son's betrayal or my physical illness. It was about a new beginning. It was about finding love and family in the most unexpected of places. It was about a billionaire who did what my own son wouldn't. He didn't just save my life, he showed me how to live again. The old Mary was gone, and in her place was a new woman, one that had been broken, but was now whole again. I had lost my son, but I had found my soulmate, and in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. The final twist wasn't a punishment for David. It was a reward for me. I had a second chance at life, a second chance at love, and a second chance at happiness. And it was all thanks to a billionaire neighbor who did what my own son wouldn't.